Mr. British, you are on the line after dark. How are you doing today?
Very well. How are you?
I'm doing very, very
Loving the
well. By the way,
accent.
lines are still open for other theists, by the way. That number again is 720-619-2288, or use the web link in the description. If you are a theist or a creationist or whatever and you want to talk to us, now's the chance to do so. Mr. British, I can answer this question real easily, but I feel like the fact that you're calling back for a second time means you have some specific context that you wanted to hash out.
No, I'm interested in hearing your simple answer initially.
Sure. Um, Paul, do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
No, you go ahead. You got it queued up.
Okay. Sure. So my moral principles primarily come from the application of like universal moral principles, which revolve around like mainly the health and well-being of like sentient beings, especially humans. And I know that sounds real fucking flowery and esoteric, but what it basically means is like everything's variable, everything's fuzzy, everything's gray, but we know what health and well-being, mental and physical, mean in terms of humanity. And more importantly, I know that I'm not the only person in the room, and I certainly know that I'm not the most important person in the room. I know what it feels like to be hurt. I know what it feels like to be heartbroken. I know what it feels like to be sad. I know what it feels like to be, in pain. I don't want anybody else to feel that way because that fucking sucks. And so basing around this just generic understanding of human health and mental well-being, I can live my life in a way that causes as little harm as possible and actually is like as productive and as helpful as possible to the humans around me, and preferably, other sentient animals as well. That's like the long and short of it. I can get into more details if you'd like, but I feel like that's enough of a jumping off point to kind of
I
move
think
forward with.
you thank you. You've used a term universal moral principles. I said, what are atheistic moral principles? And then you've used universal moral principles. You've used the terms harm. You've used the term well-being. Do you
I'm happy to
accept that
clarify any
they
of
are
these terms if you'd like.
no, that's fine. Do you accept that they're all very, very subjective?
No, no, I don't.
You don't accept that.
Universal in this context simply means like applying the same way in all scenarios. So like that's not a subjective thing. That is by definition objective. It's I'm
Okay.
going to
What
apply this
can
principle
you
across the
can you
board.
expand can you expand on universal and applying it in all circumstances? Can you give us, say, for example,
Sure.
uh, can you give us an example? Yes.
Yeah. So what I mean when I use that terminology, I'm basing that off of I can never remember the guy's. I'm 99% sure it's Kohlberg. Kohlberg was a psychologist who came up with like the kind of like hierarchy of like moral development. I'm 99% sure that's the guy's name, but I'm never quite sure. And no matter how many times I double check. But long story short, I'm pretty sure there were like 6 levels and they're grouped into 3 boxes. The very much simplified, watered down version of is that like the most basic, rudimentary kind of morality that's possible is if I do this, I get hit. And if I do that, I get a cookie. And so I'm going to do this thing and avoid that thing. And then a little bit up from that, you have I'm going to do this thing because the person in charge told me to do this thing. And a little bit up from that is I'm doing this thing because society as a whole is doing this thing. And there's like, like I don't want to stick out. I don't want to be ostracized from my group. And then a little bit up from that is there's some social benefit. Like I'm actually like kind of like working in my little group here. And like the actual like pinnacle of moral development in this guy's framework is the universal or the application of universal principles where you actually come up with like what are some actual fundamental like laws, so to speak, in big quotation marks there, I believe in that I can then apply to pretty much every situation. And so that's what I'm talking about there. When I talk about human health and well-being, that's not a subjective thing. Like you can't, it doesn't matter how you feel about being stabbed. Being stabbed is a bad thing for you. And so like when we,
Sorry.
kind of
Can I just interject there? Sorry. Could
sure.
you kindly just remind me of your name? What's your name again? Sorry.
My name's Forrest.
What is it? Sorry.
Forest, like a bunch of trees, only with an extra R.
Oh, hi, Forrest. Hi, Forrest. So
Hello.
you, let's just take that example: stabbing someone
Yeah.
or someone being
Yeah.
stabbed.
Yes.
You said in all cases it's bad. Is that right?
So you could be real pedantic about it and be like, well, a vaccine is kind of like a stabbing and those are good or something like that. I mean, like
Right, or
actually
surgery
like
or something.
put,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So like,
Yeah.
I mean, like without someone's consent, putting a knife into their abdomen in a way that would cause them grave bodily harm is generally considered to be a non-healthy thing to do. And so like, I'm not going to do that to people because it would cause them grave bodily injury. It would be painful to them. It would be violating their bodily autonomy. It would be putting their life at risk just for
Yeah.
like whatever reason I'm doing. There's really not a good scenario for that. And of course, like I said at the beginning,
Forrest.
everything's fuzzy, everything's gray. If I'm defending my life or if I'm defending someone else's life from an attacker, then maybe you could call that a good thing. But that's where like kind of like relativism and whatnot comes in, which is very important. But in general,
Okay.
causing someone grave bodily harm is a bad thing to do.
One thing I wanted to say about a comment that you made with the previous caller,
Yeah.
you both said something really nice. You said, let's take it down to nothing. And I echo your sentiments about the previous caller. They were rather bigoted. No offense to them, but can we go back to say nothingness? Would that be okay?
Or you
So
mean like,
are we still talking about morality, or you want to talk about the universe?
Yeah. In relation to the actual specific point you made about consent and grievous bodily harm, you're conflating the idea of morality with legal terminology. So I don't want you to,
not
I think
really.
it's dangerous conflating. Well, consent is it's a legal ethical issue, and grievous
No, it's
bodily
not.
harm,
It's not a
your
legal issue.
definition.
Well, I mean, it is a legal issue, but that's not why I care about it. Are not necessarily moral, and morality isn't necessarily the law. I don't conflate the two. Consent is
Okay.
actually like a different thing that we do embody in the law quite a bit, but is much more important than the law. Even if stabbing was
Because I
legal,
can,
I still wouldn't be about it.
So, Mr.
I
British, I
can,
have a
I
bit
can
of a rule.
easily,
Mr. British, sorry, I have a bit of a rule when I have a long discussion about morality, and that is that I need to agree to what the other person's definition of morality is, or at least we need to be on the same page about what the definition of morality is, so that we're not spending hours just talking past each other. So you just, you just told Forrest what is or isn't morality. So I think maybe we're operating on different definitions. So tell us, please, what definition of morality, for the sake of this call, that we will be using.
yeah. Can we agree that it's the difference between what is right and wrong?
Can you? I would then I need to put that then to your definition of right and wrong are.
Yeah. Well, I think the other person made a very, good point. We don't want to go down the rabbit hole of what is right and what is wrong. I want to understand, and in terms of moral principles, it's a, sub- it's there's an element of subjectivity as what is right and what is wrong, right?
What is
No.
please tell me what right and wrong are before I can agree or disagree to. Like, I have a definition of right and wrong, but
Well,
I'm guessing they're not the same as yours.
okay. Why don't you give me a definition and then see if I can agree with it?
Sure.
Well,
Right
it's
is the
exactly
extent
what
to
he's
which
asking you.
something encourages flourishing and discourages harm. Wrong is something that encourages harm and discourages flourishing. That's what I would,
Okay.
that's when I'm talking about morality. That's what I'm talking about.
And when you use the
Okay,
word
I'll
flourishing, are
go
you
with your
meaning
definition.
like development of like society or of the person, or are you talking about like is there something
But,
more to that?
but both, for like, yeah, that's where it's, because of
Okay.
course the greater, the more macro the scale, I feel the more
Yeah.
moral the option, but
Yeah.
there is obviously micro scales to that. So,
I
but
just want to
I'm
make sure
curious
I'm
as to
on the
what.
same page with
So
you.
Oh, okay,
essentially,
gotcha.
you're going down the
Well, yeah, but
utilitarian
I'm not saying we need to
concept
use
of,
my. I'm just saying I have them, and so that's why I'm asking you
yeah, no,
again. What are yours?
that's a fair point. Why don't we both agree on your definition? I don't think there's anything wrong with that definition in a broad sense. So we
Okay.
can move on
Free
with the
chicken. Yeah.
argument. So essentially, when I talked about going back to nothingness, let's just imagine there's 7 billion people in the world. there are no laws, okay, and there are no rules. How would an atheist go about governing these 7 billion people and applying, let's say there's no God and everyone
Figure
believes
that.
there's no concept of God and everybody's an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think society would function without
The
Do you
a
suspect
an
that big?
objective an
Do you
objective
suspect that
moral
people who
code?
don't believe in God can't tell if and can't vaguely tell if an action is intended to be harmful or not?
I'm not saying that.
Just okay.
okay.
I'm not
We didn't know
saying
why
that.
you made such a clear definition of that, but like that's fine. I actually have I might be uniquely. I'm sure Paul and I are gonna have different answers, but
Yeah,
like
go for it.
that exact scenario is something that I'm like uniquely like kind of geared towards talking about because I just happen to be a social anarchist and like that is exactly the kind of society that I'd like. And so like the concept of law. I'm also a nihilist. So like it's like the concept of law to me is kind of it's a vapid thing. It's something that we made up and it doesn't necessarily comport with reality or with morality and moral principles and legal principles aren't necessarily congruent and I am largely against oppressive government systems and things like so like yeah this is what I talk about a lot and we would accomplish a flourishing productive society where with what Paul would describe as morality based on his principles there in the exact way that I just discussed is doing things that are actually beneficial to society as a whole and individual people, protecting their autonomy, protecting their individual basic human rights, promoting the flourishing of the individual and of the society as a whole, and avoiding things hurt people, hurt communities that hurt the flourishing and development of society. Obviously, there would be some fuzzy gray area in there, as there is with everything. Sometimes you have to limit freedom in order to maximize freedom on a grand scale. For example, I've sacrificed the freedom to murder people in order to live in a society where we punish murderers. But that's cool for me because I didn't ever want to murder anybody. I don't That's not something that I'm particularly interested in because of my moral values. So that's not really a significant sacrifice for me. And so like
Okay,
that's
but
that's kind of the thing is that if the
how
society
do,
is geared towards the flourishing of like every individual person, especially geared towards education, especially geared towards equality, my philosophy is like heavily rooted in the concept that equality and liberty are inseparably linked, and that if your society isn't equal, it is not free. So if we're really focusing on equality, if we're really focusing on like the production of healthy, well-adjusted, productive human beings who are ready to go out into the world and do their level best and follow their dreams, I think that you would have a very moral society that you where you have don't have an issue with I don't want to use the word crime because I don't want to risk conflating legality with morality here again, but like with immoral acts like rape, murder, robbery, whatever else.
but how you, you you said you're a social anarchist, right? And
Yes.
uh you don't believe in laws. You don't really believe in laws. You don't think we should be governed by laws, etc.
Not in the way
And
that we
if
are.
I
Not
bring
in
you
the way
back,
that we are.
if I bring you back to this notion of 7 billion people in the world, there are no laws. There are no governments. Everyone's an atheist. How would you go about policing it? As you're the social anarchist and it's your paradigm, how would you go about policing such
I'm just
a
is
society?
is this a social engineering call? Like we're just discussing
It's not.
social engineering?
It's not a social engineer. No, no, it's not a social engineering call because I'm trying to explore what your thought processes are as atheist.
Forrest and I don't agree on this at all. And we're both atheists. So
Mhm.
you're now not in the realm of atheism versus theism.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's
No,
why I'm like
that's okay.
well, I was saying like this is something that I
Okay.
talk about a lot,
Let me
but
bring.
like it would just be me
Can I bring?
explaining my ideas, which isn't really what we're here for.
No, no, that's fine. But let me present the scenario that I wanted to discuss with you. So you have a twin brother and a twin sister who are, let's say, 25 years old. They engaging in sexual relations and they are using contraception. They're both sterile.
Can
Do you
I cut
think
you off
as
here? I'm
atheists?
sorry. Is this the very common thing that people ask, which is like, is incest bad in a situation where there's absolutely no possibility that these two people could ever produce children, which is the main reason why incest is bad? And then you get into this thing where it's like, logically speaking, there's no real harm here, but like it just feels icky, and that's God. Is that where this is going?
Well, what are your views? Yeah. Well, I just wanted your response on that,
Right.
essentially, initially.
Yeah. So why is that? I'm sorry. This is something that we've dealt with a few times, and it's kind of just predictable. What do you think? Why would that be wrong for you, or would it be?
My simple explanation is, as a theist, I subscribe to an objective moral code. So whatever that moral code says, I will determine whether it's right or wrong according to
Right.
that objective moral code.
In this situation, what is your answer?
Yeah, it's immoral.
Okay, cool. Do you believe in the Bible?
No, I don't believe in the Bible. No.
Okay, cool.
But
Just
can I
double
get
checking.
your
So
response?
then,
Can I just
what
can
is
I just
what is the
get
basis
your
of
response?
your objective? What is the basis of your objective moral code then?
No, I just wanted to explore what your response was. So we can get into my
Well, no,
personal beliefs, of course.
I'm asking you because you called in.
But,
So,
but
like, if you're here to present to us that you have some objective moral code, again, I can get into my personal feelings and philosophies all day long, but we already just had a scenario where Paul and I disagree on things. So there isn't like an atheistic moral code. We're all secular humanists here. This is kind of like what we're all about. But like that also comes with a lot of interpretations. You're calling in with your interpretation. So tell us, what is your
yeah,
objective source of an objective morality on which you are basing the decision that an incestuous relationship which can produce no children is a bad thing morally? What are you drawing that from?
well, to be honest, it doesn't matter if a theist subscribes to a more objective moral code via a scripture or some divine revelation, then that's something that they're entitled to. What I want to
Nobody's saying they're
understand
not.
from you,
Right.
sorry,
Nobody's saying they're not entitled to it. I'm asking, what is your source of objective morality? You said it's not the Bible, so what is it?
the Quran.
The Quran. Okay, cool. So let me just double check something really quick.
Yeah.
Do you accept that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, accurately reflect your beliefs of how the universe began?
No.
Do you believe in Adam and Eve?
Yes.
Okay, cool. How many children did Adam and Eve have?
Listen, I'm not well versed in religious scripture. I would need to go back to it, read it.
You probably
et
should be
cetera,
if you're
et
drawing your
cetera.
moral system from this scripture, right?
Well, absolutely. It's a work in progress. What I want to understand is the arbitrariness of your moral compass does not
Here we go.
does
I
not
just looked it up
conduce
and I found Adam and Eve had 40 children in the Quran, male and female, from 20 twin pregnancies. So apparently, this is just what I found online. So there's a Quran scholar out there who wants to correct me. That's fine. But according to this, just Wikipedia thing that I found, the Quran says that that Adam and Eve had 40 children. They had 20 pregnancies with twin babies, male and female. So that's the book you're drawing from, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Where did the rest of society
I
come
think,
from
I think,
after
I
that?
think, I think, I think your thought is incorrect. I wouldn't rely on
Okay,
Wikipedia.
let me double
It
check.
doesn't matter
So,
if it's
well,
it doesn't
you're
matter if
either-
it's 40 or 4 or 400. The quantity doesn't matter. So you would agree that the second generation of humans were brothers and sisters, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and then where did the rest of humanity come from after that?
Well, they continue to multiply, right?
With brothers and sisters.
It's a mathematical.
Right. Who
mathematical.
was multiplying? The brothers and sisters
What do
were
you
either
mean?
having sex with each other or their
Yeah.
parents, right? Right. So then you
The
think
thing-
that
the
incest is
thing-
actually good.
No. Forrest, let me explain to you, because
Please.
It's very difficult for an atheist to understand Scripture without actually understanding what God is. So rather than
Of
going
course,
to
of course.
Scripture and saying, this is what you believe, does that make sense?
No, it doesn't, because you said that your objective source of morality upon which you base all moral thinking, the objective standard separate from you that tells you what is right and wrong, is the Quran. And now we're
Yeah.
pointing out that in the
Yeah.
Quran, it explains that there were exactly two people at the beginning of humanity, and those two people had some children, who, however many number, doesn't matter. The rest of humanity existing means those children were having sex with either each other or with their parents, or maybe both. No matter how you slice it, if humanity comes from one single pair of people, there's a lot of incest involved there. And that incest is not only directed by God, but ordained by God. And that's your objective moral standard telling you that incest is wrong somehow. So you're telling me that incest is right sometimes, just in that context. Now you think it's wrong in a different context, which doesn't sound like an objective standard to me.
What do you mean by it? Why doesn't it sound like an objective standard?
Because that's
Because
something that changes.
The objective nature is God, right?
Okay, so then God is
I'm-
deciding what's right and wrong, right?
That's entirely my argument.
Which means it's subjective, because God is a subject. So he's putting his beliefs and his intentions and his concepts onto morality. He is a subjective actor who is deciding what's right and wrong in a contextual way, completely relatively, just like we are, because he says that incest is right at the beginning of humanity when he deliberately only made two people and made their children fuck each other. And now today is saying, no, it's actually wrong because we don't want inbreeding anymore, even though that's how I started the human race. So it's subjective morality that you're promoting here, and you think incest is good, but only sometimes.
No, your understanding of what a subject and an object you've misunderstood.
Is one person's interpretation of morality subjective or objective?
One person's interpretation.
Yes, is one person's interpretation of morality objective or subjective?
You're referring to God as. This is why I said you need to understand if a God exists before you start.
I don't care.
Before you start,
it doesn't matter.
God as person.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Is God a thinking individual?
I'd like to veer away.
I don't want to veer away. I want to have you answer this question. Is God a thinking individual?
Have I met God to know if they're a thinking individual? They think like you and me.
I would love for you to actually answer the question instead of dancing around it. Does God have an opinion on anything at all?
Does God have a view? Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Then it's a subjective view, because God is an individual with a mind that has a view, an opinion on things. That means it's subjective. That's what the word subjective means.
Yeah, I accept that. But the code that God has presented is God's code. And if I ascribe ascribing to it subjectively, I am ascribing to an object, which is the moral code.
So then you're telling me that then the Code of Hammurabi, is objective, because a subjective person wrote it and other people ascribed to it.
What's the Code of Hammurabi?
Set of laws it's an ancient set of laws. Good enough for now.
You can pick a different one if you like. The United States or Britain's Code of Laws. The laws that if you go and get a traffic ticket today and go to court about it, that's an objective source of morality then. Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, I strongly disagree.
Well, it's objective. So, I mean, Forrest, it might be objective in the same sense that, like, the rules of chess are objective once we've subjectively decided to agree to them.
That's exactly what I mean. That's exactly what I mean.
Okay, I can track with that. It's a crappy use of the word objective in the context that I think you're using it.
I was just right. That's what he's trying to say, I think. Okay, so you're just saying if we arbitrarily choose God, that those rules are clear. That's what you're saying, Mr. British?
It's not arbitrarily. it's not arbitrarily choosing
No, it
God.
is arbitrary because
It, it,
I haven't chosen to follow those same rules. So it is at least somewhat arbitrary, right? Like we're not all choosing to follow them.
yeah,
So
okay, I'll grant you that. I'll grant you that. I think you've been fair with trying to understand where I'm coming from, and
yeah.
I share the same sentiments in your
Well, did we lose him?
Did we
move
lose
the
you?
conversation onward.
There he is.
Okay.
Can you hear
Um,
me? Can you hear me?
we can now. You cut out for a minute there.
I
Sorry,
got you, man.
Okay, so in that weird sense, not weird sense. Let's say it. That's a bad characterization. In that sense that you are using objective. So, sure, then you have objective morality as long as you're also agreeing that you've subjectively chosen it. Forrest and
absolutely, yeah.
I are subjectively choosing well-being and harm in general, in vague general sense, as what we base our decision making on. So that example you gave, we would evaluate whether or not twins having sex, we would think about whether it's causing harm, and we would think about the extent to which it's having flourishing. I'm not going to dignify right now as to where we would land on it because I feel like you want to do some kind of weird gotcha. But the factors that we would weigh in, the factors we weigh in are: does it cause harm, and does it increase flourishing? And we would have a lively discussion and a lively thought process about that. And because that's the morality that we have subjectively chosen to use, and therefore we can make objective judgment calls within that subjectively chosen frameworks. So it sounds like we largely agree. You've chosen
Yeah.
one thing, we have
Can I-
chosen another thing, so we both have grounding.
Yeah. Okay. Can I just touch upon your points about well-being and harm?
Sure.
Now,
Okay, but are you
I-
agreeing then to what I? But are you agreeing to the? We're closing one chapter, so you're agreeing that was the
yeah,
point,
no,
and that we.
I can hear where you're coming
Okay,
from.
cool. All right.
I understand. Now,
Mhm.
when we look at you basing your moral standard on well-being and harm,
Yep.
if we take the scenario of 7 billion people who are
Mhm.
all atheists, how there's going to be so much conflict
Okay,
because
but you're
someone's
talking
going to say,
about
well,
governance,
my
not what's
well-being.
moral, right? You're not talking about what's
Yeah.
moral anymore. You're talking about governance.
It's going to be impossible to govern.
No, it's not. And
Do you?
also,
It's,
like just a little bit ago, when you thought I was conflating like governance and morality, you got onto me for it. And now that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, how do you run a society with this morality? When a minute ago you were telling me you're talking about law when you're talking about things like consent, not morality. Why are you doing that? Why not just talk about individuals like we're doing?
no, because you've used two terms, harm and suffering.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
There is not an objective moral standard on harm, on the definitions of harm and suffering and
Of course
well-being.
there are. Of course there are. There are medical
How?
textbooks, and
Please
that means
explain.
somebody wrote down things about harm, and because they wrote them down and other people agree on them, that means it's objective based on what you said earlier.
Well, that's very interesting because I'm actually a medical doctor.
Okay, I study biomedical science. We're on the same page
Which
then. We
medical,
understand that
which
there's a lot to
medical,
do. Like,
which
if
medical
you are on the
textbook are
same
you
page
referring
there,
to?
well, all I'm saying is, if
Which
you
me-
and I are on the same page here, if both of us have a background in a little bit of medicine and biology, then like we can blanketly say, I'm sure you can agree as a physician that eating rat poison is bad, but eating apples is good, right?
Well, not necessarily, because you would have to
Exactly,
you
exactly.
you would
Because
have
the fact of
to
the matter
you would
is,
have to
eating.
you would have to assess the
Go ahead.
situation on a case by case basis. So there's no
Is that a
Right.
problem?
objectiveness.
So even though it sounds like a basic truism, apples are good and rat poison is bad, at the end of the day, there's actually lots of medicines that are made from poisons and toxins. And there's actually like you
Yeah.
could theoretically eat little bits of rat poison at a time until you build up a resistance to it. That's how lots of rats get around rat poison most of the time. And you could eat too many
So
apples
that
and
begs
be
my
hurt by them.
question.
You could eat too many apples. You
So
could
it
be
begs my
allergic to
question.
apples. And so the fact of the matter is, even though that is a sticky subjective thing, or not a subjective, pardon me, a sticky, problematic, fuzzy thing, the sciences of like biomedical science and medicine and health and things like that, like they're still pretty well sound. And like you as a doctor are not going to walk into a room where someone's having a heart attack and be like, let me think about the context here. Maybe this is actually a good thing for this person. You know what a heart attack is. You know what you need to do. And so like that's the thing, dude, is like we can like we don't have to have like a set like algorithm that we can type into a computer to decide based on like this perfect like mathematics of health what college you should go to or what you should have for lunch or like what the moral implications of a traffic light are or some weird shit like that. We can just say, I know that if I were to abuse this person in XYZ way, it's going to cause them physical and mental harm. And it's going to make them a worse player in our society. Meanwhile, if I like really invest in education and try to follow the best evidence-based practices for like teaching people and like taking care of their bodily health and their mental health, that's going to lead to more productive people and happier people and healthier people and more long-lived people and a better flourishing society overall. These are kind of abstract statements, and if you get down to nitty-gritty, you can find a problem with absolutely
Do you
anything,
accept
but that
there's,
doesn't mean that our
do you accept
morality is
that,
just flippant.
do you accept that the reference that you've made to harm and well-being and biomedicine, etc., that in itself, statements that you've made are all subjective. There isn't an objective element to it.
No,
So you don't accept it.
no, I don't.
Why don't you accept it? Because it's all
Uh,
subjective. It's all case by case.
Objectively, like let's go for an extreme example here. Objectively, a stroke is bad for you, right? Like is there a fuzzy gray area in here where we can say that like giving people strokes might actually be a beneficial thing for individual people and for society as a whole?
Well, why, can I answer that question?
That's why I asked it.
If you
Yes.
have a massive brain tumor and you're operating on a brain and you get the majority of the tumor out and you have a massive stroke, but you haven't died as a result of the surgery, then actually the benefits and harms of taking the tumor out and having a massive stroke outweigh the risk of having the massive stroke because you're
Right,
still
but Mr.
alive.
British, here's what you
Agreed.
just did. But here's what you just did. You used harm as your criteria. So harm.
Yes.
So obviously, every individual action in an individual circumstance may move you closer or further away from harm, but you are still
So
using and appealing to
essentially,
harm.
Right.
Are
That's the
you
thing, man. It's not like
reducing your moral?
you just said like what you just said was really important because you're talking about like at the end of the day, the benefits outweigh the harms. You know that there is no such thing as
No, but
there's no
that
touch without a trace.
that's
Anytime you
defeating
give
your
no, hold on,
question.
let me
You
finish what
said
I'm saying. Let me finish what I'm saying. You know that if you give somebody medicine, there's always a side effect. You know that when you do surgery, you are necessarily causing bodily harm in order to get some perceived benefit. You know exactly how much you have to hurt someone in order to heal them. That's the whole point of medicine, is like trying to make that balance. But just because something's complicated and just because there's a lot of variables involved doesn't mean that it's subjective or arbitrary or open to like just, oh, I guess it's kind of just up to your interpretation as to what it is. That's still an objective
no, but
standard of whether somebody is
no,
alive and
your
healthy or dead and sick.
your question was, let's take something really big. Let's take something we all agree
As
having a
just as an
massive
example.
stroke is bad.
Yeah.
And I disagree, and I've told you. But essentially,
No,
what my
what you
understanding of
described
your
isn't good. What you described is better, not good.
yeah,
That's the
okay,
difference.
thank you.
So there is
Can I
no
just say,
scenario. There is no scenario
understanding,
in which having that massive stroke is a good thing. But in your scenario that you presented, you're giving this person brain surgery to remove a tumor and they have a stroke. At least they don't have the tumor anymore. That's better, but it's not good. The stroke is a consequence. It's a side effect. It's something that you can pick a better scenario. It's still not good. I'd rather be punched in the face than punched in the nuts. I'd rather not be punched at all. But punched in the face is
it's
better.
all,
And so, like, that's what you're describing here. It's better. It's not good.
I'm bringing it back to my argument of that being subjective. Okay. So
No, you're
my
talking about
understanding
it
of
being
your,
no, Mr. British. Sorry, you are talking about it
let
being
me fin- can you please,
circumstantial.
would
No,
you please let me
you're
finish?
talking about it being
Yes.
circumstantial. Circumstantial is not the same as subjective.
Exactly.
Okay. That you th- you're saying circumstantial is not subjective.
It's
Okay.
not the same
So,
as subjective.
It's not the
uh,
same as. They're not equivalent
my
things.
Yes.
my
They could
my
intersect,
understanding.
but they're not the same.
So, now, my understanding thus far, Forrest and
Paul.
what's your name? Sorry,
Paul.
Forrest and Paul is Paul. Yeah,
Mhm.
Forrest and Paul. I think my understanding of your moral code of conduct essentially is reduced down to a biopsychosocial medical model of. Does that make sense? Is that right?
Well, it's not. It's not medical per
Sorry.
se. I'm not sure
I
medical
apologize.
is moral, but
You cut out at the very last second there. You said a biosocial medical blah 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 concept of something, and then you said, "Am I right?" What was that last word in that sentence? So I make sure I'm agreeing with something that I actually agree with.
My preliminary understanding of your code of morality is reduced to a biopsychosocial medical code.
It cut out at the exact same place. A code of what? A code of what? What's the last part of that sentence?
A moral code. That moral code.
Okay, we'll just go with that.
Like
That's fine. Yes.
it's all reduced. It's all reduced to biomedicine essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. I'd be cool with that characterization. It's a little like obviously it's going to be a little bit more complex than that, but like that's a great way to summarize it. You know, there is no morality on Mars because there is no life on Mars. So like nothing bad can happen there. But here on this planet, we have thinking people and creatures that can feel pain. So therefore, there is a moral concept. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fair response, and I want to take that a step further.
Sure.
So
And
if we go
we're
back
going to
in
move on because
time,
we've been on this for a while.
yeah, no, I understand. If we go back in time, and when we go back to the Big Bang theory, there's an idea of the singularity. What created the singularity?
okay, so that's not a moral question anymore.
Yeah, are you moving on to a totally different topic, or is that a moral thing
No,
you're trying to bring up?
No, obviously it ties in with the idea of a creator, right?
But that,
I
that's
just
not
want
the
to ask
same as
because you asked
morality.
because you talked about science, and I've essentially said you're reducing your moral code down to science, right? And you've agreed with that.
More or less.
So,
There's a
scientific
framework, yeah. But again, I
Yeah,
can't
there's a
stress
scientific
enough.
framework.
It's just because
it's
I have a
empathy.
scientific
Yeah.
framework. Yeah, it's empathy is basically what it is. Yes. I can't stress enough. Just because I have a scientific framework.
I'm not going to spend much longer. I'm not going to spend much longer because I'm
Okay.
sure you.
Ask your question, and I'm going to trust you that it relates. Let's go.
Yeah.
What
yeah. So you're
created
asking
the
what created the
singularity?
singularity? I don't know.
And
Because
this
you're asking-
answers. It's the same caller. We
Fine.
don't know.
Prove it.
We don't know.
Yeah,
don't know if
I
there
don't know.
was or not.
You're
That's
asking.
fine.
So
You're asking.
we don't
And
think
can I ask
before
you-
the
can
Big
I ask-
Bang,
I've got one
and the
more
Big Bang
question.
was the sorry, hold on. You're asking what happened before the Big Bang, and the Big Bang is, by definition, the beginning of space and time. So you're asking what happened before the concept of before had any meaning, before time started, and you're asking what happened outside of literally everywhere. So in a place that doesn't exist at a time that isn't.
I didn't
when
say anything about before. I said what
Well, you said
created
what created the singularity, which is asking me what is existing and what is doing things. Doing things requires time. You're asking what happened in a time, in a place, with with some creature or whatever, or being or whatever that's existing outside of everywhere before time started. That question makes no sense to me. I don't have an answer for it. I don't know if it can be
That's
answered.
fine. I've got one
and
more
that's
question,
where
and
the
then I'll
position of
go.
science is, as far as I
I've
know.
got one. I've got one more question, Forrest and Paul, before I go.
Okay.
Okay. Can't wait to see how this falls back in the script.
Because the first question and the second question are related, because we've talked about moral principles, then we extended it into science. I asked you, the second question was very short, and you've answered it very succinctly. If God came in front of you right now let's just let's just say there was a God, and God came
Sure.
in front of you, Forrest and Paul, right now. What what would what would it take for you to both be convinced?
I have an answer. Do you
Do
have
you
an
want to go
answer for us?
first? I do. Do you want to go
My
first?
answer, sure. No, you go first. Go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay. Well, it seemed like you had a
Okay.
good one. I was excited to hear.
Okay.
You go
My
first.
answer is that I would, because I would think that it's more likely that I'm hallucinating or there's something else going on that I don't understand,
No,
that
no,
I would want
no,
some
no.
external.
Forget the hallucination, because hallucination's got a medical definition.
No.
But
I'm a
you
dummy.
just asked a question and he's answering it. Just let him talk. God damn.
So I would,
Okay,
because I
thank
would
you.
because I would suspect that this may well be something that I'm imagining, or that like there's some kind of something that isn't veridical. I would ask that being that I'm interacting to give me the answer to one of the many math problems that have never been solved in the world. There's a long list of math problems that have never been solved by anyone. I know that I'm not good enough at math to come up with the answer. So that would be able to tell me that it is not purely an internal thing that I was experiencing. Now, that wouldn't necessarily rule out that it's
my
a
summary is
non-divine.
you would
Hold on, hold on.
Would love it.
hold
I
on.
would love it if you would just let him finish answering your question, dude. Just let him talk.
absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So that wouldn't be enough to tell me that this was a divine being, obviously, and it would, because it could be another being that's just smarter than all of humanity. But it would be a good start for me, and I would at that point have pretty good reason to believe that that being was worth being listened to, and then I would investigate further. But that's my answer.
That's a good answer. I have an
Okay.
answer as well, but I'll let you
what
respond
about
to his
yours,
first.
Forrest?
Okay, cool. Yeah. So
No,
I would.
that's a very.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So
do
for
you want me to
me,
respond to him? Do you want me to?
yeah, please, you
Sure.
respond
Do
to
you want
him
me to
first, and then I'll
respond
give you
to
my
him?
answer. Yes.
Thank you very much.
You respond to Paul, and then I'll give you my answer.
Or did we lose him?
Better not have fucking lost him. After all this, it's been 45 minutes trying to get to this point. Mr. British, are you there?
Yeah, I can hear.
Oh, you just
Can you
cut
hear me?
now. Okay. Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Please respond to Paul, and then I will give you my answer.
So Paul, my understanding of Paul, to be convinced that God exists, Paul would only be convinced if he saw and observed God,
That-
in whichever form that is, and he would ask a math question which has been unanswered, and then he would do some further investigation.
So you didn't ask, you're now changing the question. You didn't say what would convince you of God. You said, what would you do if God appeared before me?
Yes, that's a fair response. That is a fair response.
So if
That is a fair
that's a very different question of what would convince me that God exists. So, but I'm going to let
No, but
Forrest
if God
answer,
came in
because
front, if God came in front of you, that would be convincing enough, right? Because that's what Paul said.
no, I deliberately gave all kind of caveats as to why that wouldn't be necessarily convincing enough. So, but we're going to move on to Forrest's
very
answer.
Yeah, sure.
So you're
Um,
saying even if God presented himself in front of you, that you would ask lots of things, you would investigate, but you would not necessarily be convinced.
I think that it's I think that if anyone who doesn't double check such a thing,
Mhm.
that's the problematic person. I'm not the problematic person in this scenario. If you just accept a vision of something as being veridical automatically, I question yours.
I think that's sensible. I think that's sensible.
No,
So
no,
what would it take
No,
to
it's not
convince you?
sensible.
no.
This is how we get
So, like,
people murdering people. Like when,
Yeah,
oh,
that's-
God appeared to me, and
I didn't. No.
My answer actually, I feel like builds off of that.
Oh,
So if it's cool, I'll go
go
ahead and go
for it.
on it, because like that's, I think one of the things that Paul touched on is actually how I would start my answer, which is that like if a God appeared before me and was like, "Yo, what up? I'm God," I would have no way of being sure that I'm not drugged, that I'm not hallucinating, that I haven't gone insane, that this isn't an alien, that this isn't some super insane CIA tech that's totally new to me that I don't understand. Even if it can answer a question, maybe it's an interdimensional space traveler that actually knows the answer to that question. I don't know the difference. But if there is such a thing as a God, if there actually is an all powerful, all knowing being, that creature would know exactly what it would take to actually prove themselves beyond a shadow of a doubt and make sure that I fully 100% understood that it was them. And so, like, if that, whatever the hell that looks like, if that were to happen, if I was actually shown concrete, undisputable, absolute evidence that proves that this God actually is real beyond a shadow of a doubt, then I would admit it. And I would say, okay, yes, that is a God. I am now a theist. However, I would still be an anti theist. The first thing you asked what I would do, the first thing I would do is tell this God to fuck off, because any God that runs a universe like this is a monster. And any God that has rules like the kinds that are put upon us, all the gods on offer in Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism, whatever, you pick your favorite, all of these gods are megalomaniacal sociopaths that care about nothing but their own praise and worship and don't give a hell about human well-being at all. And if a God is actually there and in charge, they have a lot of explaining to do, and they need to be held accountable for their actions. So if a God does exist and it can be proven to me, again, I'll be the first to admit it, and I'll be right here on this show saying this God's a dick and I want nothing to do with him. I wouldn't be an atheist anymore, but I'd still be an anti-theist.
I think that I'm sorry if you thought I said Paul's answer was nonsensical. I didn't say that. I said and your answer as well also makes sense to me. So my understanding is you've got a show, a call-in show where there will be nothing anybody can say ever to convince you, essentially.
No,
No, that's not what either of us said. You again,
Nope.
you posited a next time you call in, which it sounds like maybe you will. Don't posit
Yeah.
that question. Instead, posit the question. What you're really looking for is what would convince you that God exists. We don't have time for that right now, but next time you call in, ask the question that you really want the answer to.
I went one further. I said if God presented himself in front of you,
But that's not
I understand it would be if you let me finish. I said
sure.
it would be sensible to further investigate whether this is, you're not having a hallucination or whatever, and to essentially confirm. Forrest said yes. Forrest would say he's a dick. I don't want anything to do with you. You've got lots of answering to do. And you said yes. You'd ask lots of questions and talk about what would convince you. But essentially, the point of this show is whatever anybody says, even if God presented themselves in front of you, you would still have issues. With that,
No.
thank you very much.
Okay.
That's a misrepresentation of what we just said. But hey, man,
Yeah.
keep on straw manning and keep on misrepresenting, and you'll keep on believing.
Exactly.
It'll be great. Call
The
in
point
better
of
with
this
a
show
better
is-
microphone next time.
Yes, definitely improve your microphone. The point of this show is what do you believe and why? Not convince us is not the point. But also then I think, for me, the answer is I don't actually know what would convince me. And perhaps it is literally someone phoning in. Maybe that is the thing.
Well, that's the thing. It's like if you talk about anything in science, that's the
Mhm.
point, is like building a reasonable argument and getting to like where you actually have a convincing thing. I try to point back to like plate tectonics. In the 1960s, there are people alive today who were born in a time when the world didn't believe in plate tectonics, and where there was a big fucking public controversy about whether or not we should be teaching plate tectonics in school, because it's this
Right.
controversial theory that's like changing what we think about geophysics. But it turns out plate tectonics is true. And you know what got us there? It's evidence and like reasonable arguments and having like actual discussions about reality. That's what would convince us of a God as well. More than likely, it's like if something exists, there's going to be evidence for it, and that evidence can be grappled with. And that's what this show should be for, is like actually grappling with that evidence, talking about it. Bring us your what do you believe and why. We'll discuss it. Maybe it will be good enough for us. Who knows? But to sit here and say, okay, so you're plugging your ears, and like even if God himself showed up, you wouldn't be convinced. That's not what we fucking said. We said we double check. And I can show up and say I'm God. That doesn't prove anything.
Right. Exactly.
I have to demonstrate it. You know what I mean? Like this guy better be able to do more than some cheap magic tricks in order to convince me.
What we did not say was, well, I will only believe in plate tectonics if I myself see the continents shifting. Like, that's not
Right. Go watch Pangea break apart, and
right.
then you can tell me the plate tectonics is no, you just need
No,
evidence for it.
exactly.
Like, that's yeah. It's oh, man. I'm gonna move up